Okay. And with that, I would like to introduce Susan Gilliland, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Susan?
Thank you, Ron. We're very pleased to have Dessi Sieburth with us tonight. Dessi is a sophomore at Stanford University and plans to pursue ornithology as a career. Desi's been birding since he was 8 years old. By the time Dessi was 11, he'd won the American Birding Association Young Birder of the Year contest. And by 18, Dessi had published several articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals, including Ornithology and Western Birds, and joined the board of Los Angeles Birders, whereas he is the youngest member of our board. We're very pleased and honored to have him with us. So without further ado, please.
Whoa, I think we lost Frank and Susan.
I think they
No, you didn't. We're here. We're just waiting for Dessi to share his slide.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll go ahead and share.
Go ahead, Dessi. It's all up to you.
All right. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. And thank you all for coming. Today, I'm going to be talking about identifying raptors in flight. We're going to start off with a few polls. So if Ron, you could fire up the first poll, that'd be awesome.
And here is the first poll. And again, you can drag that poll to one side or the other. I think this is the part where Mark actually hums the theme song to Jeopardy. Mark?
Oh no, I'm not going to do that this time.
Oh, but you have such a lovely voice.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
We should get your sax out.
Ooh, yeah, a live performance.
Exactly.
And we are coming up on 68%. Let's give everyone a few more seconds. Your final choice. Dot, 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 and that ends the poll. Okay, Dessi.
All right. Yeah, you can show the results. That'd be awesome.
Okay, I shall.
Awesome. Yeah. So the majority of us thought red-tailed hawk, which is indeed correct. So yeah, it sounds like you guys are already very solid on the red-tail ID. So we can go to the next one.
Okay. And here you go. Mark, can you at least whistle the theme song? Oh boy, oh boy. Okay, we're coming up on 65%. Okay, Mark, can you give us the last 4 bars again? Boom, boom. Okay, and the poll is ended. And share the results, Dessi.
Yep, that'd be great. Awesome, yeah. Again, the majority of us thought Swainson's hawk, which is correct. Yeah, it sounds like you guys already know a lot about Raptor ID. This one might be a little trickier though.
They haven't getting you the good stuff. Here you go. It's kind of slower pace on this one. I think this is throwing a curve to many people. We're coming up on 50%. Mark, can you move it up half a key or move it up 1 key and do the last 10 bars or so?
Okay, not completely
Oh,
in
we're
tune.
we're
Sorry.
pushing 67%. Come on, people. Make your last guess. And it's ending in 3, 2, 1. Oh, you received applause from someone. All right. Okay, are we ready to share? Desi?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So this one was a bit more across the board.
Mhm.
This is in fact a red-tailed hawk. And yeah, we'll explain why it's a red-tailed hawk in this presentation.
Fantastic. Okay.
The next one.
Oops, there we go. Here's Raptor 4. And choices are coming in a little faster than the last Raptor. Mark, I think we only have time for the last 8 measures. And if you wouldn't mind moving it up a minor third this time.
Oh, come on.
Okay, actually,
Uh,
that's okay. I think we have plenty of
we probably
answers.
have
We're going to
we
end the
probably have
poll in
answers by now.
3, 2, 1, and here are the results, Desi.
Cool. Yeah. So the most common choice was Ferruginous hawk, which is correct. Oh, a lot of people also said Northern Harrier, which is a raptor I'm not going to talk about in this presentation. But I'll just say that this is not a Northern Harrier because of these white patches on the upper wing here. Harrier would not have that. And also the tail would be a lot longer on a Harrier. But yes, this is a Ferruginous hawk.
Great. Okay,
And the last one is this one.
and here's the last one. Little bit slower on this. Oh, now we're kind of having an onslaught. Do we have to identify the bird in front or the bird behind, Jesse?
Well, only one's a raptor.
That's true.
So, yeah, the bird on the right is the raptor, and the bird chasing it is a crow.
Sounds good. Okay, Mark, big finale. That's kind of a small finale, but
I know, a non-grand finale.
non-grand. Okay,
Deep finale.
5 more seconds. We're at 62%. 4, 3, 2. Get your last votes in. 1, and here are the results. There we go.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Most people said red-shouldered hawk. Also a big share of Cooper's hawk. This is in fact a red-shouldered hawk. We know it's a red-shouldered hawk because of this really the banded tail, the bars throughout the wing. Tail's a bit thicker and shorter than a Cooper's hawk would have. So this is a red-shouldered hawk. All right, cool. Yeah, so that's it for the poll. Yeah, thank you all so much for participating. And so now let's get into why raptor identification is so tricky. Well, it's largely due to the fact that a lot of raptors are extremely variable in plumage. So for example, this right here is a red-tailed hawk. This is also a red-tailed hawk. So is this. So is this, as well as this and this. So these birds look quite different from each other, but they're all the same species, a red-tailed hawk. So it can make it difficult to rely on single field marks for raptor identification. So the first step into identifying raptors is determining what group of raptor you're dealing with. And there are 3 main groups of raptors: the falcons, the accipiters, and the buteos. And generally the remainder of raptors, I'm kind of characterizing it to something else. This something else would be like ospreys, eagles, harriers, and vultures, which do not fall under falcons, accipiters, or buteos. But now let's take a closer look at each of these three main groups. So the first group we'll have a look at is falcons. And I should mention that today we're not going to dive deep into the identification of different falcons. We're going to do that for buteos, but we're going to look at the falcon group as a whole. So falcons can be identified by their very long pointed wings, as you can see here on this prairie falcon. The tails are usually pretty long, slender, and rounded. Falcons also have a very powerful direct flight with lots of flapping. Like you generally won't see them soaring around. You'll generally see them just kind of blasting through, flapping very fast. And 4 species of falcons occur regularly in Southern California. That's the American kestrel, the merlin, the peregrine falcon, and the prairie falcon. And this is a prairie falcon. Here are a couple more photos of falcons, just so you get a better impression of their of this group as a whole. And both of these birds, you can see the nice pointed wings, almost forming like a triangle on the outer edge of the wing. And you can also see the pretty thin, fairly long tails. So the bird on the right here is a peregrine, and the bird on the left here is a merlin. But again, for now, you just know the general characteristics of falcons. So the next group we'll take a look at is accipiters. Accipiters are characterized by their very rounded wings, unlike falcons, which have pointed wings. They also have pretty long, slender tails like falcons. Accipiters have a pretty direct flight with a lot of flapping. You'll generally see them flapping more than soaring, although they certainly can soar. And two species of accipiters occur here: the Cooper's hawk and the sharp-shinned hawk. Here's another couple photos of accipiters. You can see the very rounded wings on both of these birds. And yeah, again, we're not going to delve into accipiter identification. Accipiters as a group are incredibly tricky to identify and would require an entire webinar of their own. Yeah, just for now, be familiar with the general shape and structure of accipiters. And finally, we have the buteos. And these are generally our large hawks. They all have very broad, rounded wings. And they also have pretty proportionally short, very broad tails. They're often seen soaring and not flapping very much. And 7 species occur with at least a little bit of regularity in Southern California. And we're going to dive deep into the identification of buteos. And before we do that, here's just a nice graphic someone made of the silhouettes of buteos, accipiters, and falcons. And the differences in wing shape and structure become very apparent when we see them in silhouette. So let's focus on the buteos. 7 species are seen with some regularity in Southern California. These are the red-tailed hawk, the Ferruginous hawk, the rough-legged hawk, the Swainson's hawk, the zone-tailed hawk, the red-shouldered hawk, and the broad-winged hawk. And for this talk, I'm going to focus on the top 5. So the red-tail, the Ferruginous, the rough-legged, the Swainsons, and the zone-tail, because these are our large buteos. So first, I'd like to talk a bit about color morphs of buteos. Most buteos have 2 to 3 color morphs, light, dark, and intermediate. So these 3 birds are all red-tailed hawks. On the left here is a light morph bird. You can see it's very white overall. And in the middle here is a dark morph bird. You can see the inner wing and the entire body is completely kind of sooty black. And then there's also the intermediate morph. Some of the black has been replaced by this kind of rufous color, There's still some markings in the inner portion of the wing. So I've organized this talk into light and dark morphs for each buteo species. So the first buteo we'll be looking at is the red-tailed hawk. The red-tailed hawk is a very common, widespread, year-round resident in Southern California. These are generally the hawks that will be just sitting on telephone poles right along the freeway. And in general, the most common hawk you'll see around here. And from the map here, you can see the species is a year-round resident throughout much of the lower 48 states. But once you get north into the upper Midwest, into Canada, and even up into Alaska, didn't mean to do that. The species only breeds and does not winter. So let's take a look at the plumage of a light morph red-tailed hawk. So starting at its head, you can see that it's pretty much all dark, pretty much this kind of sooty brown color throughout the entirety of the head. The adults have the characteristic red tail that gives the species the name. But keep in mind that the juveniles do not show this red tail. And we'll see some examples of juveniles in the next slide. Most red-tailed hawks have this dark belly band right here, kind of a concentrated area of streaks in the middle of the belly, giving the impression of a belly band. But the thing you'll really want to look for on a light morph red-tailed hawk are dark patagial bars. And I'm talking about this area right here, this kind of solidly dark color, kind of in the shoulder area. This is a really diagnostic characteristic of a light morph red-tailed hawk, and a feature you should always be looking for when you see a light morph hawk. The other thing you want to look for is a dark trailing edge to the wing. So what I mean by the trailing edge is this area kind of at the end of the wing here. And this dark trailing edge is created because each of the flight feathers are tipped in black. So this kind of creates a black line at the end of the wing. And overall, just shape and size. The red-tailed hawk is a pretty bulky, big-headed hawk, pretty broad-winged hawk, and a broad-tailed hawk. Just overall, pretty bulky, big-headed buteo. So here are 4 more photos of red-tailed hawks. On all 4, you can see the dark patagial bar. So right in this area, right around here, as well as here. Those are all the dark patagial bars. You can also see the dark trailing edge, especially on the left 2 birds. Juveniles have a much less distinct dark trailing edge. So the bird on the right here is a juvenile. It doesn't have a very distinct dark trailing edge, and its tail is also not red. So that tells you it's a juvenile. And finally, on all 4, you can see the solidly brown head that really contrasts with the white breast. Even from a distance, like in this one, that dark head really does stick out. I'd also like to add that this bird in the middle here doesn't really seem to show a belly band. I mean, the belly band is one of the most cited characteristics of red-tailed hawks, but this bird really doesn't seem to show it. So just keep in mind that all these field marks are quite variable, and you should always use a combination of field marks when identifying raptors. So here's what a red-tailed hawk looks like from above. You can see the entirety of the upper wing, as well as the back and the head, are pretty much all brown. There's not really any white on the primaries. There's a little bit of kind of white mottling on the scapulars and also kind of on the inner wing here. This white mottling is pretty variable. And yeah, this bird is actually kind of showing a hint of a white rump, which is kind of interesting. Most red tails really show no hint of a white rump, but this bird does. So again, like a lot of these field marks are very variable. But usually when you're looking at a red-tailed hawk, you're just kind of looking at a very solidly brown bird when you're looking at it from above. So the next species we'll take a look at is the Ferruginous hawk. So on the map on the left here, you can see that it breeds in the Great Plains area and generally winters in the southern United States, as well as in northern Mexico. Within Los Angeles County in particular, it's a winter visitor from October to April, mainly in the Antelope Valley near Lancaster. So here you can see a map of its, an eBird map of its distribution within Los Angeles County. And you can see that these dots are densest, or most dense, up in this area, up in the Lancaster, Palmdale area. They occasionally cross the mountains and show up on the in the LA basin, but this is pretty rare. And if you really do want to see a Ferruginous hawk, I definitely recommend going up to the Antelope Valley in this area, where they're pretty common in winter. So here's what a Ferruginous hawk looks like. The head is usually pretty pale. It's not that really solid brown color of a red-tailed hawk. The throat is usually white, and even the remainder of the head can be white. The tail is solidly white, and the entirety of the underparts are white. So there's no belly band. And overall, a Ferruginous hawk just gives an impression of a very white hawk. In the adults, there are rufous markings in the inner wing, as you can see here. Ferruginous means kind of reddish or rufusy. So these little reddish marks here could be what gives the species the name. These rufous marks are not present in juveniles. These rufous marks are replaced by black marks in juveniles, and we'll see an example of that in the next slide. There's a hint of a dark trailing edge. You can see there's kind of a very washed out, kind of grayish trailing edge on this bird. And there's usually no trailing edge on juveniles. So here are a couple more photos of Ferruginous hawks. So this bird is a juvenile. As I mentioned earlier, there's no rufous markings. There's only black markings on the inner wing here. So this bird's a juvenile. And yeah, here you can see an adult with really heavily marked underwings with rufous. On both of these birds, you can see the very white tail. And yeah, both of these birds just give the impression of a very white hawk overall. There's a very limited trailing edge on both of these birds, characteristic of this species. And you can also see the pale throat and the generally pale head as well. Yeah, here's just another photo of a Ferruginous hawk. Just really shows how white it is. That really white tail, white body, white wings. Just a very white bird. So here's what a Ferruginous hawk looks like when you're looking at it from above. So starting at the tail here, you can see that the tail is about half white and half black. All three of these photos show that, especially the bird in the middle. You can see that looking down on it, the tail appears half white and half dark. You can also see that there's these pale upper wing patches on all three birds, characteristic of all ages and in this species. And yeah, you can also see the pretty white head on the right and leftmost birds. So the next species we'll take a look at is the rough-legged hawk. So looking at the map on the left here, you can see it's a very northerly breeder. Breeds in the Arctic tundra, even way north to these islands in Canada. And they winter throughout the lower 48. They're most numerous in the northern part of the United States, but also occur south from time to time. Within Los Angeles County, this species is a rare and declining visitor to the Antelope Valley. So here's an eBird map of the species. So here's Lancaster and Palmdale, and you can see that there are quite a few markers in this area. But most of them are from a long time ago, like in the 70s and 80s. when the species was a lot more numerous in the Antelope Valley. It's hard to say exactly what reason caused the decline of the rough-legged hawk in the Antelope Valley, but a big reason has to be that a lot of agriculture and grasslands in the Antelope Valley have been converted to solar farms. So habitat has just really decreased for them. You can see they're most dense up in this area. This is kind of the Taft area. The Carrizo Plain is up here, which is a very good spot to still see the species. And you can see they occasionally make it over to the coastal slope. Like here's one from Bolsa Chica. Here's one from Santa Cruz Island. But really they're more of a desert species in this area. Let's turn on my light. Yeah, so here's what a light morph rough-legged hawk looks like. So starting at the head is often very pale, very whitish. But the thing you'll really want to look for on a rough-legged hawk is the black carpal patches. That's this area, the solidly dark colored patch, kind of in the wrist area. Looking at the belly band, you can see it's very broad and black, contrasting with the white chest. You can also see there's a dark trailing edge. Most rough-legged hawks have a trailing edge more distinct than this bird, which you'll see. And looking at the tail, you can see the tail is white with a black tip. Yeah, and just generally in terms of shape, and rough-legged hawk is generally a pretty small-headed hawk, a small-headed, big-chested hawk. That kind of gives it a very cute impression, not really a fierce, like red tail-like impression, but a much more petite feel to it. Yeah, so here are 4 photos of light morph rough-legged hawks. The bird on the left here is about as pale as they get. Like this bird has almost no hint of a belly band, but the head is still white. The dark carpal bars are still there. The tail is white with that black band across the tip. Yeah, but this bird is just like weirdly pale. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is like this one on the right. This one on the right is kind of on the dark end of the spectrum. It has a huge belly band. Its head is very much dark. Though it still has these black carpal patches and still has the white tail with the dark band around it, which is how you know this is a rough-legged hawk. In the middle here is a more typical looking individual with that really white head, the black belly band, and the dark carpal patches. And yeah, you can also see the trailing edge. The trailing edge is very bold in these 2 birds. So yeah. So here's what a rough-legged hawk looks like from above. So from above, it looks fairly similar to a Ferruginous hawk. The tail is mostly white with a black tip. Recall that in the Ferruginous hawk, the tail is about half white and half black. But in the tail of the rough-legged hawk, it's mostly white with just that black band across the tip of the tail. Looking at the upper wing, in the adults, the upper wing is solidly brown with no pale patches. But looking at this bird, which is a juvenile, it has a nice pale patch in the primaries. So the adults have no pale primary patch, but the juveniles do, like a Ferruginous hawk. And looking at this bird on the right here, it's showing some of the underwing, and you can really see that nice black carpal patch right there. And the next species we'll have a look at is the Swainson's hawk. The Swainson's hawk undergoes an incredible migration. They breed in the western United States and winter all the way down in Argentina, as you can see on this map. Some of them go as far north as Alaska, and they go all the way down to Argentina twice a year. Within Los Angeles County, the species is a pretty common spring migrant. Their spring migration starts in about February, sometimes as early as January, and extends into May. They're much more uncommon in the fall. from like September to October as a fall migrant. And a few pairs nest in the Antelope Valley, in the orchards around there. But if you go farther north into like the Central Valley, Swainson's hawks become very common breeders. They become almost like red-tailed hawks, where the majority of polls has a Swainson's hawk sitting on top of it. Yeah, I also wanted to mention that during spring, the Swainson's hawks often form large groups, like in this photo here. And this was taken in Tucson in the spring. They're one of the very few hawks to regularly like flock. Most hawks you just kind of see singly. So if you see a large group of hawks together in the spring around here, it's very likely they're going to be Swainson's hawks. So here's what a Swainson's hawk looks like. A Swainson's hawk has a very distinctive shape, especially its wings. Its wings are very long and slender and almost pointed at the tip. Kind of like a falcon, but I mean, still the shape of a buteo, but just really long, slender wings. Looking at its plumage, you can see that the inner wing is white, and this sharply contrasts with the outer wing, which is dark. Taking a look at the head, you can see both the head and the breast are dark brown. Swainson's hawks often show a white chin. It's a bit hard to see on this photo due to the lighting, but usually the chin and sometimes the throat on a Swainson's hawk is white. The remainder of the underparts are clean white. There's no sort of belly band. And yeah, so here's a few more photos of Swainson's hawks. On all four of these photos, you can see the really distinctive shape. There's these really, really long wings, long, slender wings that are almost pointed at the tip. You can also, in all four, you can see the contrast between the white inner wing and the dark outer wing, especially in this photo on the top here. Even from a great distance, that contrast really stands out. You can also, on this bird, you can see the white chin, a little bit of a white chin there. This bird here is a juvenile because it has some spotting below. It's not a belly band. It's just some barring or streaking on the breast. But you can still see the nice contrast.
I just wanted to mention to you, Dessi, that we can't really see your cursor on the screen. So
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So on the photo on the bottom here, yeah, the bottom photo is a juvenile. And we know it's a juvenile because of the light spotting down in the breast. It's still identifiable as a Swainson's hawk due to that distinctive shape, as well as the nice contrast between the white inner wing and the dark outer wing. So here's what a Swainson's hawk looks like when looking at it from above. The entirety of the upper wing, as well as the back and the head, are solidly brown. The tail is also solidly brown, though there's a little white rump patch that the species often shows. It's quite indistinct, but the majority of Swainson's hawks show this little white patch just in front of the tail. So that sums it up for the light morphs. So now let's take a look at the dark morphs, which are often trickier to identify. So the first dark morph we'll be looking at is the red-tailed hawk. So here's a dark morph red-tailed hawk. These dark morph red-tailed hawks often have some rufous coloration around the chest and the legs. This bird doesn't show it very much. This bird just is kind of solidly chocolate brown. But a lot of them do show some rufous coloration in them. The adults have the nice red tail. The adults also have a really broad trailing edge to the wing. And the upper parts are solidly brown. There's not going to be any pale primary patch or anything going on in the tail or the rump. Just solidly brown. So here's a couple more photos of dark morph red-tailed hawks. In the bird on the left here, you can see a little bit of that rufous in the breast. You can also see the very broad dark trailing edge, making this an adult. On the bird on the right, this is also an adult. You can see the red tail, as well as the pretty broad trailing edge. But in red tails, there's also an intermediate morph that's kind of halfway between a dark morph and a light morph. So here are two examples of dark morph juveniles. We know they're juveniles because they don't have red in the tail. On the bird on the left, or in both these birds, you can see that the patagial bars are still present, that solidly dark color around the shoulder area. You can also see the all dark head on the bird on the left. And you can also see the kind of whitish tail with many dark, thin dark bands across it, characteristic of a juvenile red-tailed hawk. So the next dark morph we'll look at is the Ferruginous hawk. So yeah, looking at the trailing edge here, like in the light morphs, the dark morph Ferruginous hawks don't really show much of a trailing edge. Again, you can see this is a pretty washed out gray color to the trailing edge. The tail is white, like in the light morphs. There's also these really nice white crescents right in this area. This little white patch in between two dark patches. This field mark helps separate it from a dark morph rough-legged hawk, which we'll get to shortly. And Ferruginous hawks often have a very distinct rufous tone to the body. This bird shows some of that rufous tone, especially around the leg area. And this could also be how Ferruginous hawks get their name. I'm not sure if it's from the dark morph or the light morph. So here's a couple more photos of Ferruginous hawks. You can see the nice rufous tone to the body on this bird on the left. You can also see the pale crescents, pretty indistinct on this bird, but they are still present in between the two dark areas. The tail on both of these birds is completely white, as you'd expect, and pretty much the flight, pretty much the entirety of the flight feathers, the primaries and secondaries, are clean white with not very much barring. So again, yeah, it just leads to a very sharp contrast between the dark body and underwing and the light outer wing, kind of like a reverse Swainson's hawk, I guess. Here are a couple more photos of dark morph Ferruginous hawks from above. In both of these birds, you can see a pale upper wing patch, characteristic of both juveniles and adults. On the bird on the left here, you'll note that the upper tail is dark. And on the bird on the right, you'll note that the upper tail is pure white. That's because the right bird is an adult and the left bird is a juvenile. So when you're looking at it from below, both the adults and juveniles have a pure white tail. But when you're looking at it from above, it's only the adults that have a nice white tail. So the next raptor we'll look at is the dark morph rough-legged hawk. The rough-legged hawk has a broad black band at the end of the tail. Usually the tail is kind of completely white with the dark band. This bird has a particularly dark tail, but we'll see some more typical examples in the next slide. The adults have a really broad trailing edge to the primaries and secondaries. And there's also a lot of barring going on just above that dark trailing edge in the wing. So here are three photos of dark morph rough-legged hawks. The left bird is an adult male, the middle bird's an adult female, and the right bird's a juvenile. And we mostly know this by the pattern of the tail. The adult male often has the most heavily barred tail, it has this really broad black band at the end of the tail, but it also has a few other bands above that broad black band. While the adult female usually has a solidly white tail with a nice broad black band at the tip, like in the light morphs. And the juvenile often lacks a band, or the band is quite indistinctive. You can also see on this juvenile that there's not much of a trailing edge, which characterizes the species. So all in all, when viewing a juvenile rough-legged hawk from below, it appears very much like a ferruginous hawk. So that's where those primary crescents in the ferruginous hawk come into play, because the rough-legged hawk does not have those little crescents. The underwing is solidly dark without those crescents. So looking at it from above, the rough-legged hawk is actually quite different from a ferruginous hawk. You can see that the tail is black with these 3 white bands across it in both of these photos. That's very typical for all plumages of a dark morph rough-legged hawk, and very different from a ferruginous hawk, which has an all-white tail as an adult, and an all-dark tail as a juvenile when looking at it from above, and it would never show these bands across the tail. Looking at the upper wing, you can see it's pretty much solidly dark. There's not much of a white primary patch, especially on the bird on the right. The upper wing just appears solidly dark and lacks those primary patches of a ferruginous hawk. So the next hawk we'll take a look at is the dark morph Swainson's hawk. Like the light morph, shape is very important in identifying a dark morph Swainson's hawk. Like in the light morph, the wings are long and slender and almost have a pointed feel to them. Swainson's hawk in the dark morph often comes off as an all dark hawk with bright white undertail coverts. Unfortunately, in this photo, the legs are kind of blocking the undertail coverts, but in the next slide, we'll see some examples. And like in the light morph, the remiges are usually completely dark and contrast with these kind of rufous-y inner wing. So yeah, here's a few more photos of dark morph Swainson's hawk. In all of these, you can see the really distinctive shape that is really long, thin wings. And the bird on the right here, you can see how it kind of comes off as an all dark hawk with the white undertail coverts, and also in the bird in the bottom here, just a very dark hawk with white undertail coverts. Yeah, you can also see the white chin and throat in the bird on the left, characteristic of a dark morph Swainson's. And in all of these birds, you can see that the primaries and secondaries are completely dark. And yeah, on this bird, you can see there's a western kingbird chasing it. If you're curious as to why it's a western kingbird, I'd highly recommend watching John Feenstra's talk he gave for LA Birders a few months ago on our LA Birders YouTube channel. Here's another dark morph Swainson's. Again, you can really see just how it's a really dark hawk with those nice white undertail coverts right above the legs. Yeah, so looking at it from above, you can see there's no white primary patch. The upper wing is solidly dark. Like in the light morphs, there's often a hint of a white rump. A bit hard to see here, but you can see a little bit of white extending onto the upper side, onto the rump. Yeah, and you can see the all dark primaries and secondaries, contrasting a little bit with these kind of rufous-y coverts, the rufous-y inner wing. So the last species we'll take a look at is the zone-tailed hawk, which is a very rare visitor to Southern California from the Southwest. You can see the range here. You can see that they breed throughout the Southwest and also into Mexico. You can see that they actually get really close to breeding in California. in northwestern Arizona, and also in the Mexicali Valley in Baja, California. And so it's not surprising that they bred a few times in the Mojave Desert, which is in the far eastern portion of California, very close to their expected breeding range. As you can see on the left, zone-tailed hawks look a lot like turkey vultures. So here's a turkey vulture, sorry, on the right. So here's a turkey vulture on the left and a zone-tailed hawk on the right. And you can see how similar the flight styles are to each other. They have these very angled wings, known as a dihedral. Both species do. They're both very black overall, with paler primaries and secondaries. And there's actually a reason for zone-tailed hawks looking and flying a lot like turkey vultures. And people think the reason for this is because the primary diet of the zone-tailed hawk is small birds. But turkey vultures don't eat small birds. And therefore, small birds aren't afraid of turkey vultures, and they won't fly away when a turkey vulture flies overhead. So therefore, the zone-tailed hawks try to disguise themselves as turkey vultures so that the birds won't notice it as a predator and fly away. So it's a pretty cool adaptation that these zone-tails have. So here's what a zone-tailed hawk looks like. You can see the plumage overall is very blackish. The adults have a nice broad trailing edge. Yeah, and just above the trailing edge, you can see that the entirety of the primaries and secondaries are heavily barred. And we'll see why that field mark comes into play in a moment. The tail is banded. The adults have a mostly black tail with this really distinct white band across the tip. And the bill and legs are yellow, which helps differentiate it from a turkey vulture, as well as the feathered head. I mean, turkey vultures have a bald red head. Here are a couple more photos of zone-tailed hawks. Both of these birds look like juveniles, just because they don't have they really have no trailing edge at all. It's just kind of barred all the way out to the tip of the primaries and secondaries. Also, looking at the tail, I mentioned that the adults had a mostly black tail with a nice white band. The juveniles have a mostly white tail with several dark bands across it. And you might be wondering, like, zone-tailed hawks look very much like other dark morph buteos. Like, take the rough-legged hawk, for example. Like, these two birds look very similar to each other, especially this bird, this rough-legged, which has a particularly strongly banded tail. But how you differentiate these two is looking at the barring in the primaries and secondaries. So on the zone tail here, you can see consistent barring throughout the primaries and secondaries. While on the rough-legged hawk, you can see that there's kind of this big white patch at the upper end of the primaries, which the zone tail lacks. So the zone tail is really the only hawk, the only buteo that's going to show strong barring throughout the entirety of the primaries and secondaries. Here's just another photo of a zone-tailed hawk. This looks like an adult because of the nice dark trailing edge. And again, you can see the nicely barred primaries and secondaries with no white patch like a red tail or a rough-legged would have. So that concludes the identification of our raptors. But now you may be wondering where we can see raptors. A great place to see raptors is the intersection of 110th Street East and Avenue I in Lancaster, in the Antelope Valley. This is a great spot for seeing Ferruginous hawks in the winter. And yeah, there are tons of red tails there as well. Lots of different morphs and ages. In the spring and summer, you can see Swainson's hawks there. So if you go there in like March, you can catch kind of the sweet spot and see Ferruginous, Swainsons, and redtail all together over the agricultural fields. Another great spot is the Carrizo Plain, several hours north of us in San Luis Obispo County. Going to the Carrizo Plain offers the best chance for a rough-legged hawk in Southern California. It's one of the few spots in Southern California where you can still see rough-legged hawks on a regular basis in winter. There's also lots of Ferruginous and red-tailed hawks there, as well as Swainson's hawks in spring and summer. And I'd also highly recommend going to Borrego Springs when the Swainson's hawk spring migration is going on. I mentioned that Swainson's hawks often fly in flocks of up to hundreds of birds. And Borrego Springs is a spot where you can reliably see that. Every evening, the hawks come to roost there in like mid-March. And if you're there like from 9 to 10, you can see all the hawks taking off and migrating north, which is super cool. And finally, I wanted to show a few weird raptors that didn't really seem to fit anything. This hawk was photographed in Ontario, and it's thought to be a hybrid between a red-tailed hawk and a rough-legged hawk. Overall, the shape looks better for a rough-legged hawk. The head looks very small. The chest looks pretty big, characteristic of a rough-legged hawk. However, the bird also has dark patagial marks, characteristic of a red-tailed hawk. But it also has dark carpal patches, characteristic of a rough-legged hawk. The tail is red, like a red-tailed hawk, but the band at the tip is pretty thick and dark, more characteristic of a rough-legged hawk. So it seems that the most likely scenario for this bird is that it's a hybrid of a red-tailed and a rough-legged hawk. Hybrids in hawks are extremely rare, but there are a few recorded instances of this species pair. Here's another weird hawk photographed in Texas. It's thought to be a hybrid of a Swainson's and a rough-legged hawk. Plumage-wise, it looks very much like a rough-legged hawk. It has this really thick black belly band, a pretty pale head, a streaked breast. It has a hint of dark carpal patches, but there's no distinct tail band. I mentioned that rough-legged hawks often have this white tail with a really distinctive dark tail band. But this bird's tail just seems kind of solidly gray. A few indistinct bars throughout the tail, much like a Swainson's hawk. So this bird is thought to be a hybrid of a Swainson's and a rough-legged hawk, photographed in Texas. And finally, I just wanted to end by putting up this chart I made. It pretty much goes over all the characteristics of buteos. You have each species we've talked about, the morph, the age, and just some key identification marks such as a belly band, a trailing edge, what the tail looks like, and whether whether there's an upper wing patch or a pale rump patch. So I'd definitely recommend saving this, and hopefully it's somewhat useful. But again, these are just generalizations. Hawks are extremely variable, and not every hawk shows every plumage, shows every field mark that I've outlined here. And there are also lots of field marks on this chart, or lots of field marks that I could not include on this chart. But yeah. So yeah, that concludes the presentation. Thank you all so much for coming. And are there any questions? Yeah, I'll just leave the chart up.
Desi, that was absolutely wonderful. Mark, do you want to? Lots of questions came in. Do you want to pepper Desi with them?
Sure. So Thomas Walton asks, what are the benefits, survival, reproduction, to having different morphs?
Oh, that's very interesting. I do not know. Yeah, that's a great question, but I don't know what the benefit of having multiple morphs would be like. I mean, there are like places where you generally see like more dark morphs and places where you generally see more light morphs. So morphs do kind of tend to congregate by location very generally. So I suppose there must be some reason why different morphs of hawks tend to congregate in different areas. So I suppose maybe a dark morph hawk might be more adapted to a specific area than a light morph of the same species. I'm not sure the exact ecological reason for that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. That's, and a follow-up, which you basically is the morph determined by age or where the bird lives or something else?
Yeah, it's certainly not determined by age. I mean, as we've seen, they're dark morph adults, dark morph juveniles, and there's, I mean, as I mentioned, there's a very weak correlation between where it lives and its morph. Like Ferruginous hawks, I think the majority of the dark morphs are in the far west. But overall, like, I mean, light morphs are a lot more common than dark morphs. But overall, there's not really a strong correlation between location and morph.
So what would you say, this is a question asked by Calvin. What would you say the percentage of light morph red tails versus dark morph red tails are in our area? And how does that percentage vary between different regions?
Yeah, I would, in the Los Angeles basin, I'd probably say, 40-1. In the Los Angeles basin, you very rarely see dark morphs. Light morphs are a lot more common. As you go into the desert, dark morphs tend to become a bit more common than they are in the basin. I'd say then it's probably like 10-1, like out in the Antelope Valley. The light morphs are certainly dominate. And does this percentage vary between regions? A little bit, but I don't think there's really a region where there's more dark morphs than light morphs. So yeah, overall, I'd say the desert has more dark morphs than the coast.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting questions. And Calvin has another one. What happens with the genetics of light morph versus dark morph birds? Is one dominant over the other? Is it completely random? If a light morph and a dark morph bird breed, what will the chicks be? And does this tend to happen, or do dark and light pairs mostly hang out together? All great. So that one question is like 4 or 5 in there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I really don't know the answer to any of those questions, really. I can't recall ever seeing a light morph breeding with a dark morph, but I'm sure it happens. And I really don't. I really think light morphs and dark morphs breed. I think a light morph and a dark morph are just as likely to breed as two darks or two lights. And obviously, the majority of pairs will be lights, just because the majority of birds are lights. But I don't think there's a strong difference in the proportion of breeding and the proportion of birds. And I don't know what the chick will be. I have no idea. It's a good question. Yeah. I'll have to look into that.
Well, these are great questions about how these morphs actually work. Laura has a question that doesn't have to do with morphs. So we have a non-morph question for a second. What percentage of adult zone-tailed hawks do you think can be sexed on tail pattern?
I'm not aware of a reliable way to sex zone-tailed hawks. Maybe there's some very subtle pattern in the tail, but I think the tail pattern of a zone-tailed is very variable, and I don't think it's super reliable to try and sex them based on any pattern in the tail. Rough-legged hawks probably can be sexed especially the adult males. If you have a lot of bands in the tail, it's probably an adult male. But yeah, I'll have to look into sexing zone tails a bit more.
Okay, thank you. James Zimmer asks, can a morph switch juvenile dark to light adult?
Oh, no, it cannot. A dark morph juvenile will be a dark morph adult. Yeah, they do not switch.
Ken asks a question that I can answer. How do we get a copy of your chart? And so Dessi, send me just one little slide of the chart, and I could stick it on the website of your talk.
Awesome.
So that's so I could answer that one.
Thanks, Dessi.
Tom Hinnebush, Harlan's and other such designations. Is there anything to this, i.e., any valid generalizations?
Yeah, so I tried not to go too much into red-tailed hawk subspecies, because that's a whole nother can of worms. And but Harlan's is one of the more distinct red-tailed subspecies. Most Harlan's are dark. I mean, Harlan's come in both dark and light morphs. Harlan's is a subspecies of red-tailed hawk. And yeah, especially the dark morph Harlan's are pretty distinctive. They have really nice white streaks on the dark breast, which is pretty unique among buteos. So yeah, Harlan's is certainly a subspecies you can identify, and I certainly recommend trying to identify. They're very rare here in Southern California, but do show up from time to time. But yeah, other subspecies I'd be less inclined to try and identify.
Okay, thank you. An anonymous attendee asks, what are the chances of intermediate morphs for hawks in general in our area?
Yeah, intermediate morphs are certainly the rarest of the morphs. I mean, mainly because they only occur in a few species, like red-tailed and Swainsons. For red tails, intermediate morphs are pretty rare, even rarer than dark morphs. So maybe like on the coast, like 1 in 100, and maybe in the desert, like 1 in 30. So yeah, overall pretty rare, but for the red tails, most of the intermediate morphs kind of have a nice red chest and red around the legs is how you can identify those.
Very cool, thank you. And Molly asks, do any red-tailed subspecies beyond our normal western type birds and Harlan's ever occur in Southern California? And do you think they could be identified here?
I'm not specifically aware of any. And I mean, there are very subtle characteristics that can identify subspecies, but again, hawks are just so variable. I wouldn't try and identify any other subspecies besides like a normal subspecies and a Harlan's. I know in the hawk watches in like Mexico, they do try and identify every red-tailed subspecies and are able to do it with some accuracy, certainly not much accuracy. So yeah, I don't really think so.
Okay, great, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? If you do, stick them in the Q&A.
Well, Lily does ask in the, whoops, I lost it, in the chat, does hawk habitat vary on morphs?
No. Hawk habitat only varies on species. A Ferruginous, a dark morph hawk will use the same habitat as a light morph hawk. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you often see morphs in the same places, different morphs in the same places. So different morphs of the same species use the same habitats and very often the same places.
Fantastic. I just want to remind everyone that Desi will be sending this chart to us so that it can go up on the website and it'll be under webinars tab for this webinar. And Desi, I just want to thank you for a wonderful webinar and presentation.
Yes,
Thank
thank you, Desi.
Yes, it was fantastic, and we're going to be sorry to temporarily lose you, but hopefully you'll be able to cut loose a few times a month from your studies up at Stanford to join us for webinars and board meetings.
Yeah, he's already agreed to do some webinars in the future, so we'll hold him
Fantastic.
to that. So
Thank you very much, Desi. That was great.
And I just wanted to point out that there were an awful lot of Lab S people involved in the questions. So great for Lab S. Woohoo! I'm really proud of you guys. And mahalo, Desi. You're getting tons and tons of thank you,
Yes, in the
thank
chat.
yous in the chat. So I think everyone really appreciated it and was very thankful. So to everyone out there, don't forget next month we have some wonderful webinars coming up. Please check our website at labirders.org to see what's coming up. Check for any educational opportunities, and we may even start our field trips and things like that soon. So please get involved on that. If you aren't a member, please join LA Birders at our website. Just click on the join, and you will be able to participate in the Zoom in the Zoom webinars, plus other benefits of being a member. And I think that's it. Mark, do you have any final
I
words?
think that's it. No, I don't have any final words. I mean, we could do more bird jokes, but we do those at the beginning.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Anyways, thanks again, Desi, and
Thank you, Desi.
All right. Thank you, Desi, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And we will see you all next month. Take care.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.